Thomas Bennett grew up far from the ocean, in a small, quiet town nestled deep in the American heartland. Life there was simple, predictable. His days were filled with chores, school, and the endless horizon of cornfields. But Thomas harbored a restless spirit, a yearning for something more than the familiar rhythm of farm life. The world felt vast, and he wanted to see it, to be part of something bigger. That yearning, combined with a deep sense of duty and the economic realities of the late 1930s, pushed him towards a transformative decision. He decided to join the U.S. Navy. The Navy offered him an escape, a pathway out of the quiet life he knew, and a promise of adventure that painted vivid pictures in his young mind. Basic training was a jolt, a harsh awakening to the discipline and rigor of military life, but Thomas met it head-on. He learned quickly, adapted to the routines, and found a new kind of family among his fellow recruits. His early assignments were mostly uneventful, a series of ports and duties that slowly chipped away at his naive view of the world, replacing it with a growing understanding of naval operations. Then came the news that would change everything. He was assigned to Pearl Harbor. The journey to Hawaii was filled with a mixture of awe and excitement. The stories he'd heard, the pictures he'd seen, none of them truly captured the vibrant beauty of the islands. Pearl Harbor itself, in the late 1930s, was a marvel. It was a bustling hub of naval activity, a strategic jewel in the Pacific, yet it also felt like an idyllic paradise. The air was warm, the ocean a startling blue, and a pervasive sense of security seemed to envelop the servicemen stationed there. They were in paradise, protected by the vast expanse of the Pacific and the might of the American fleet. There was a quiet confidence, an almost untouchable peace, that settled over the base. Thomas was assigned to the USS Arizona, one of the grand battleships of the fleet. His role on the ship involved maintaining one of the many complex systems below deck, a job that required precision and constant attention. His days were a blur of routines: early morning revel, drills, maintenance checks, shared meals, and the occasional shore leave. He quickly bonded with his shipmates, a diverse group of young men from all corners of the country. They shared stories, played cards, and dreamed of home. Their camaraderie, a comforting constant amidst the steel and machinery of the battleship. Thomas often wrote letters home, describing the beauty of Hawaii and the close friendships he'd forged, always downplaying the mundane aspects of naval life. Despite the apparent calm, subtle hints of escalating global conflicts began to seep into their isolated paradise. News reports, often filtered and delayed, spoke of Japan's aggressive expansion in Asia, of growing tensions in the Pacific. Whispers of war were distant, almost theoretical, easily dismissed by the overwhelming sense of invincibility that permeated Pearl Harbor. They were too far, too strong, too secure for anything truly bad to happen, or so they believed. The threats felt abstract, not real. The eve of December 7, 1941, was a typical Saturday for Thomas. He had enjoyed some shore leave, perhaps a movie or a quiet drink with friends, before returning to the Arizona. He might have written another letter home, describing the perfect Hawaiian weather, or simply prepared for a relaxing Sunday. There was nothing, absolutely nothing, to suggest that the next morning would be anything but ordinary. He went to bed, his mind filled with the simple thoughts of a young man enjoying his life, completely unaware that in just a few hours, his world, and the world entire, would be irrevocably shattered. The calm before the storm was absolute, profound in its unsuspecting tranquility. The morning of December 7, 1941, began like any other Sunday. Thomas Bennett was deep in a peaceful sleep, the gentle rocking of the USS Arizona, a familiar lullaby. He awoke slowly, the Hawaiian sun already casting a warm glow through the porthole, promising another perfect day in paradise. The usual sounds of a ship coming to life were there, the distant clatter of pots from the galley, the soft murmur of early risers. Then came the first unexpected sound, a dull thud that seemed to vibrate through the ship's hull. It wasn't loud enough to cause immediate alarm, more like a far-off construction noise or perhaps a ship dropping anchor a little too forcefully. Thomas dismissed it, rolling over to grab a few more minutes of sleep. But then came another, louder thud, followed by a series of rapid, sharp explosions. This wasn't a drill. Drills had a specific rhythm, a practiced tone. This was chaotic, jarring. Confusion quickly morphed into a prickle of unease, then a jolt of alarm. He scrambled out of his bunk, pulling on his uniform as the ship's alarm bells began to blare, a piercing, insistent shriek that cut through the morning calm. The PA system crackled to life, but the words were garbled, lost in the growing din outside. Thomas rushed towards the deck, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The sight that met him was unbelievable, a scene ripped from a nightmare. The sky, once a serene blue, was now streaked with black smoke. Low-flying aircraft, sleek and menacing, buzzed overhead. And then he saw it clearly, on the wing of one plane as it swept past, the red circle of the Japanese rising sun insignia. Disbelief was a fleeting guest. Terror took its place instantly. His mind struggled to process what his eyes were seeing. An enemy attack, here, at Pearl Harbor, on a peaceful Sunday morning. It felt impossible, yet it was happening. Chaos erupted on the USS Arizona's deck. Men were running, shouting, some still half-dressed, all scrambling for their battle stations. The air was thick with the smell of burning oil and cordite. The initial bombs and torpedoes had already found their marks. Thomas could see plumes of smoke rising from the battleships Oklahoma and West Virginia, their hulls already listing precariously. The sounds were overwhelming, the roar of airplane engines, the staccato bursts of machine gun fire, the concussive blasts of bombs, and the screams of men. The entire harbor seemed to be erupting in fire and destruction. He instinctively headed for his assigned station, a gunnery magazine below deck, but the path was already blocked by panicked crewmen and the beginnings of a fire. He saw sailors, dazed and bleeding, staggering across the deck. One moment a man was beside him, the next he was gone, swallowed by an explosion that rocked the ship. The visual impact was immediate and brutal, ships burning, sinking, men struggling in the oil-slicked water. The air vibrated with the sheer force of the attack, a relentless assault that showed no mercy. The base, caught completely by surprise, struggled to respond. Anti-aircraft guns, designed for slow-moving targets, were largely ineffective against the swift Japanese fighters. Still, men fought back. Thomas saw a few brave souls trying to bring up ammunition, others attempting to man the few operational guns, their faces grim with determination and fear. He found himself hustled by a senior officer towards a damage control party, his role shifting from gunnery to immediate survival and aid. He grabbed a fire axe, his hands shaking, his mind reeling. The world had turned upside down in a matter of minutes, and he was right in the middle of it. Then came the hit that sealed the USS Arizona's fate. Thomas was helping to drag a wounded sailor away from a small fire near a bulkhead when he felt it. Not just an explosion, but something deeper, more fundamental. It was a massive jolt, a wrenching, twisting force that seemed to tear the very fabric of the ship. A deafening roar swallowed all other sounds, a sound that vibrated through his bones. He saw a flash of blinding light, an orange-yellow inferno erupting from the forward part of the battleship. He felt himself lifted, thrown violently against the steel wall, the breath knocked out of him. Debris, hot and sharp, rained down. The ship bucked and groaned like a dying beast. He knew instantly, with a chilling certainty, that the Arizona had taken a direct hit to its magazine. The main part of the ship just exploded. There was no mistaking the sheer, catastrophic power of it. The deck beneath his feet seemed to buckle, then tilt sharply. He could feel the heat searing his skin, even through his uniform. When he finally pushed himself up, dazed and disoriented, the scene was indescribable. Where the forward mast and part of the bridge had been, there was now only a gaping, fiery maw. A massive fireball billowed hundreds of feet into the sky, casting an ominous flickering glow over the entire harbor. The ship was literally torn apart, a twisted mass of metal and fire. He could see bodies, or parts of bodies, flying through the air, then disappearing into the oily black smoke. The sheer scale of the destruction was beyond anything he could have imagined. Many men were gone in an instant, vaporized by the blast. Thomas himself was lucky. He had been close enough to the edge of the blast zone to be thrown clear, but not close enough to be consumed. He felt a sharp pain in his head and arm, but the adrenaline coursing through him dulled the worst of it. He saw a jagged tear in his uniform sleeve, his skin underneath scraped and bleeding. His ears rang, and a metallic taste filled his mouth. He looked around wildly, trying to make sense of the chaos. The ship was sinking fast, listing heavily to port, fire raging everywhere. He knew he had to get off. The deck was a death trap. He scrambled over twisted metal, stepping around the fallen, the wounded, and the dead. The air was thick with smoke, making it hard to breathe, burning his eyes. He could hear the screams of men trapped in the wreckage, a horrifying chorus that would haunt him for years. He saw an opening, a section of the railing that had been blown away, leading directly to the water. Without a second thought, he jumped. The water was a shock, cold and thick with oil, but it was also burning. The surface was a terrifying mosaic of black oil and licking flames, fed by the ship's ruptured fuel tanks. He had to swim under the burning patches, coming up for air only when he found clear spots. He kicked and pulled, his muscles screaming, trying to put as much distance as possible between himself and the sinking inferno that was once his home. He saw other sailors in the water, some swimming, some floating lifelessly, some flailing, consumed by the flames. Their cries for help, choked by smoke and oil, were agonizing. He kept swimming, his eyes stinging, his lungs burning. He passed debris, pieces of the ship, personal belongings, all floating in the dark, burning water. He saw a life raft, overturned, and pushed himself towards it. Reaching it, he clung on, gasping for air, his body trembling. He wasn't alone. Another sailor, younger than him, with wide, terrified eyes, was already there, coughing up oil. They looked at each other, two ghosts emerging from the inferno. The Arizona continued to burn behind them, a monument to the sudden, brutal reality of war. The sight of it, sinking slowly, majestically, into the harbor, was seared into his memory. He had survived, but the image of the burning ship and the screams of his shipmates would never leave him. The small life raft drifted slowly away from the burning wreckage of the USS Arizona. Thomas, still clinging to its side, watched in disbelief as his ship, his home, continued its agonizing descent into the harbor. The other young sailor, whose name he didn't even know, was huddled on the overturned raft, shivering, his face streaked with oil and tears. They were alive, but the world around them was a nightmare. The water was still dotted with burning patches of oil, and the air was thick with smoke and the acrid smell of burning fuel and flesh. Eventually, a small motor launch, filled with other survivors and rescue personnel, spotted them. Hands reached out, pulling them from the cold, oily water. Thomas felt a wave of relief, followed immediately by a crushing exhaustion. He was helped onto the launch, his limbs heavy, his head throbbing. The noise was still deafening. Distant explosions, anti-aircraft fire, the roar of planes, and the constant wail of sirens. The launch sped toward Ford Island, a makeshift aid station already overwhelmed with casualties. The scene there was chaotic. Wounded men lay everywhere, on stretchers, on the ground, some still dripping with oil, others bleeding profusely. Doctors and nurses, their faces grim and determined, moved frantically between them, trying to triage the most critical cases. The air buzzed with low moans, hushed commands, and the desperate cries of men in pain. Thomas was quickly assessed. His head wound was superficial, and his arm was just a deep scrape. He was given a blanket, a cup of water, and told to sit with the other walking wounded. He sat on the ground, shivering despite the warm Hawaiian air, and tried to make sense of it all. The sheer scale of the destruction was becoming clearer. From Ford Island, he could see the entire harbor. Battleships that had been proud symbols of American power now lay crippled, some capsized, others listing heavily, still smoking. The USS Oklahoma, completely overturned, looked like a dead whale. The USS West Virginia and California were settling into the mud. The air base itself was a mess, hangars destroyed, planes burning on the tarmac. It was like a scene from a disaster movie, except it was terrifyingly real. His eyes scanned the faces of the men around him, searching for anyone he recognized from the Arizona. He saw a few, their eyes as hollow and shocked as his own. They exchanged silent nods, a shared understanding of the horror they had just endured. Many, too many, were missing. He thought of his bunkmates, the men he had shared meals and laughs with just yesterday. Where were they now? The thought brought a fresh wave of nausea. The initial shock slowly gave way to a profound sense of despair. He had survived, but at what cost? The images of the burning ship, the screams of his shipmates, the faces of the dead in the water, were seared into his mind. He felt a heavy weight in his chest, a mix of grief, anger, and an overwhelming sense of helplessness. How could this have happened? How could they have been so unprepared? As the day wore on, the rescue efforts continued, but the grim reality set in. More bodies were being pulled from the water than survivors. The harbor became a graveyard. The sun began to set, casting long, eerie shadows over the devastation. The fires still burned, painting the sky with an orange glow. The next few days were a blur of somber activity. The base was in mourning, but also a frenzy of recovery. They were given new uniforms, rudimentary medical care, and meager rations. News of the attack spread like wildfire, reaching the mainland, then the world. The scale of the disaster, the audacity of the attack, shocked everyone. Thomas listened to the radio reports, heard the words, "Day of Infamy," and felt a cold resolve harden within him. The world had changed. America was at war. And he, a survivor of Pearl Harbor, was now a part of it, carrying the heavy burden of what he had witnessed. The innocence of his youth, the dream of paradise, had been shattered forever. President Roosevelt's voice, though coming from a crackling radio, cut through the somber atmosphere like a knife. His words, declaring December 7th as a date which will live in infamy, resonated deeply with Thomas. It wasn't just a speech. It was a rallying cry that transformed the collective shock and grief into something fierce and unyielding. Determination. For Thomas and the other survivors, it wasn't just about America being attacked. It was personal. Each of them had lost friends, seen unspeakable horrors, and felt the raw terror of that morning. Roosevelt's speech didn't just galvanize the nation, it solidified a burning resolve within Thomas. The confusion, the helplessness, the despair, they began to crystallize into a singular purpose. America was at war, and so was he. The immediate mobilization efforts were swift and overwhelming. Pearl Harbor, still smoldering, became a hub of frantic activity. But this time, it wasn't chaos. It was organized urgency. Ships that could be salvaged were worked on around the clock. Airfields were reinforced. Anti-aircraft defenses, so tragically lacking just days before, were rapidly upgraded. Thomas, still reeling but physically recovered enough, was quickly reassigned. There was no question of leaving the Navy. The thought never even crossed his mind. The young recruit who had dreamed of paradise and adventure was gone, replaced by a hardened survivor with a deep-seated desire for vengeance. His new role involved helping with the salvage operations, a grim task that constantly reminded him of the destruction, but also fueled his resolve. Every piece of twisted metal he helped move, every body he saw recovered, strengthened his commitment to the fight ahead. The war in the Pacific began almost immediately, a brutal and unforgiving theater. Thomas, like many other Pearl Harbor survivors, found himself thrown into the thick of it. The early stages were marked by fierce battles, desperate stands, and the long, arduous road to recovery and retaliation. The memory of Pearl Harbor was a constant companion, a silent motivator that pushed them through the toughest moments. For them, every engagement, every victory, no matter how small, was a step towards avenging their fallen comrades and ensuring that such an attack would never happen again. They fought with a grim tenacity, their personal experiences giving them a unique edge, a fire in their bellies that went beyond mere duty. Coping with the trauma and stress of constant combat was a daily struggle. The men relied heavily on each other, forming bonds that were forged in fire and fear. There was an unspoken understanding among the Pearl Harbor survivors, a shared experience that no one else could truly comprehend. They talked sometimes in hushed tones, sometimes with explosive anger, about what they had seen. They found solace in shared memories, even the horrific ones, and in the dark humor that often accompanies extreme situations. This camaraderie was their lifeline, a shield against the psychological toll of war. They looked out for one another, knowing that they carried not just the weight of their own experiences, but also the memory of those who didn't make it out of the harbor. The long shadow of Pearl Harbor stretched far beyond that fateful day. It shaped Thomas's actions, his decisions, and his entire perspective throughout the war. The determination to ensure such an attack would never happen again wasn't just a national policy. It was a deeply personal vow. He fought not just for his country, but for the ghosts of the Arizona, for the men whose lives were cut short in that sudden, brutal assault. Even amidst the larger war effort, the psychological impact of December 7th lingered. It was a wound that refused to fully heal, a constant reminder of vulnerability and loss. But it was also a source of immeasurable strength, a burning ember that fueled his fight until the very end. The attack had stolen his innocence, but it had also forged him into a man of unwavering purpose. The end of World War II brought a complex mix of relief and weariness for Thomas. The victory parades, the joyous celebrations, all felt somewhat distant, viewed through a haze of emotional exhaustion. He had survived, he had fought, and he had seen the world change in ways he could never have imagined. The journey back to the United States was less about returning home and more about returning to a place that no longer felt entirely familiar. He was a changed man, carrying experiences that set him apart from those who had not seen the horrors of war firsthand. The innocence of the young man who had boarded the Arizona was long gone, replaced by a quiet stoicism and a depth of understanding that few his age possessed. Reintegrating into civilian life presented its own set of challenges. The world had moved on, but Thomas often felt stuck in time, replaying the sounds and sights of battle in his mind. People back home, well-meaning as they were, couldn't truly grasp what he had endured. Their questions often felt trivial, their understanding shallow. How could he explain the smell of burning oil and flesh, the screams of dying men, the constant fear, to someone whose biggest concern was the price of a new car? He found it difficult to share his experiences, often retreating into himself when conversations turned to the war. Finding a new purpose, a career path that felt meaningful after fighting for the very survival of the nation, was a struggle. The mundane seemed meaningless after the monumental. Like many veterans of his era, Thomas carried invisible wounds that were not openly discussed or understood. Nightmares were frequent, vivid replays of bombs falling, ships exploding, and men drowning. Anxiety was a constant companion, a low hum beneath the surface of his daily life, triggered by sudden loud noises or unexpected movements. Flashbacks could strike without warning, transporting him back to the fiery chaos of Pearl Harbor or the brutal skirmishes in the Pacific. In that era, the concept of post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD, was largely unrecognized. There were no widespread resources, no therapists specializing in combat trauma. Veterans were simply expected to get over it, to be strong, and move on. Thomas coped in his own way, often through hard work, quiet reflection, and the company of other veterans who understood without needing explanations. He built walls around his memories, protecting himself, and perhaps those around him, from the raw pain he still carried. His wartime experiences inevitably impacted his family and relationships. Building a family life while carrying such heavy memories was a delicate balance. He tried to shield his loved ones from the darkness he harbored, often leading to a quiet distance, a reluctance to fully open up. His wife, bless her heart, learned to read the subtle signs of his distress, offering comfort when she could, and giving him space when he needed it. His children saw a loving but often reserved father, a man who rarely spoke of his past, but whose eyes sometimes held a deep, unreadable sadness. The support systems were informal, relying on the understanding of family and the unspoken solidarity of fellow veterans. For many years, Thomas kept his experiences largely to himself. Veterans organizations existed, but his involvement was sporadic. He wasn't one for grand speeches or public displays of heroism. The societal shift in acknowledging the sacrifices of Pearl Harbor survivors took time. For decades, the focus was on moving forward, on rebuilding. But as time passed, and the generation that fought the war began to age, there was a growing recognition of their unique place in history. Slowly, gradually, Thomas began the process of coming to terms with his past, not just for himself, but for the sake of those who needed to hear it. He realized that his story was not just his own, but a piece of a larger history that must never be forgotten. The silence that had once protected him now felt like a burden, a story yearning to be told. As the decades rolled on, a stark reality began to set in. The number of Pearl Harbor survivors was shrinking. These men, once young sailors, were now in their twilight years, their ranks thinned by time and age. Each passing year saw fewer and fewer of them, elevating the importance of those who remained. They became living archives, their memories priceless, finite, and irreplaceable. Public interest in their first-hand accounts grew exponentially. People, especially younger generations, started to realize that these men were the last direct links to a pivotal moment in history, and their stories held a unique power that no textbook could fully capture. The urgency to hear and preserve their testimonies became a collective societal effort. For Thomas, this growing awareness coincided with his own evolving perspective. The silence he had maintained for so long, a shield against pain and misunderstanding, began to feel like a disservice. He realized that his personal story was not just his own burden, but a vital piece of history that deserved to be told, not just for himself, but for his fallen comrades and for future generations. The turning point wasn't a single dramatic event, but a gradual shift, a quiet understanding that settled within him. His motivation was clear: education, remembrance, and the solemn duty to honor those who perished on that fateful day. He started cautiously, perhaps with a local school visit, then a veterans event, and eventually interviews with historians and journalists. Each time he spoke, a little more of the burden lifted, replaced by a sense of purpose. Through his recounting, Thomas consistently emphasized a few key messages. He spoke of the importance of vigilance and preparedness, a lesson etched into his soul by the surprise attack. He articulated the immense cost of war, not just in lives, but in the enduring pain and sacrifice it demanded, advocating for the profound value of peace. Most importantly, he highlighted the incredible resilience of the human spirit, how ordinary men faced unimaginable adversity with courage and determination. His words weren't about glorifying war, but about understanding its profound impact and the strength found in its aftermath. He wanted people to grasp the human element of history, the faces behind the dates and statistics. Among the most poignant experiences for Thomas were his emotional returns to Pearl Harbor, particularly to the USS Arizona Memorial. Standing over the sunken battleship, where his shipmates still lay entombed, was always a deeply moving, almost spiritual experience. The memorial, a stark white structure bridging the submerged hull, represented not just a grave, but a testament to sacrifice and an enduring symbol of a nation's resolve. For Thomas, it was a place of communion, where he could feel the presence of those he had lost, a silent conversation with the past. Each visit reaffirmed his commitment to sharing his story, to ensuring their memory lived on. He would stand there, a lone figure, sometimes with tears in his eyes, sometimes with a quiet, determined gaze, remembering every detail of that horrific day. The impact of Thomas's testimony was profound. His personal narrative, delivered with a quiet dignity and an unwavering sincerity, resonated deeply with audiences. He didn't embellish or dramatize. He simply told the truth of what he saw, felt, and endured. For younger generations, who had only read about Pearl Harbor in textbooks, his words brought history to life in a way no written account ever could. He became a bridge between the past and the present, a living connection to an event that shaped the course of the 20th century. Through his willingness to speak, Thomas began to build an invaluable legacy, not just for himself, but for all those who experienced December 7, 1941. His courage in reliving those painful memories allowed countless others to understand, to remember, and to never forget. Thomas Bennett, in his later years, became a living testament to history. His dedication to remembrance and education never wavered. He was not just a survivor. He was one of the last living links to a pivotal historical event, a direct voice from a time that reshaped the world. The respect and admiration he garnered from around the globe were immense, not for any grand achievement, but for his quiet courage in carrying the weight of history and sharing it with unwavering honesty. He embodied the spirit of those who endured, a humble man who bore witness to the unimaginable. The significance of his unique perspective cannot be overstated. History books can recount dates, strategies, and statistics, but they cannot capture the raw terror of the explosions, the smell of burning oil and flesh, or the agonizing cries of dying men. Thomas Bennett's eyewitness account of Pearl Harbor was invaluable precisely because it provided those details, those emotions, the human experience that history books often miss. He didn't just tell a story. He opened a window into the past, allowing others to glimpse the horror and heroism of December 7, 1941. His contribution to the collective memory of the attack was immeasurable, ensuring that the human cost was never forgotten. The day came, as it must for all, when Thomas Bennett passed away. His passing marked the end of an era, a profound loss felt not just by his family and friends, but by the nation and the dwindling community of Pearl Harbor survivors. With him, a direct voice from that fateful day was silenced forever. The news of his death was a somber reminder that the generation who lived through World War II was slowly fading, taking with them first-hand accounts that could never be fully replicated. It closed a chapter in American history, marking the transition from living memory to historical record for one of its most defining moments. Yet the enduring message of Pearl Harbor, carried by men like Thomas Bennett, lives on. The lessons learned from December 7, 1941, are as relevant today as they were then. They speak to the importance of vigilance, the dangers of complacency, and the profound responsibility of leadership. They remind us of the immense sacrifices made and the inherent fragility of peace. The attack on Pearl Harbor continues to impact American identity and foreign policy, a constant echo reminding a nation of the need for preparedness and the strength found in unity. It is a story that underlines the human capacity for both destruction and extraordinary resilience. Thomas Bennett's legacy is, in many ways, immortal. His story, painstakingly preserved through countless interviews, documentaries, and personal recollections, continues to educate and inspire. He stands among the unsung heroes of World War II, not for firing a decisive shot or leading a charge, but for his unwavering commitment to truth and remembrance. His courage in reliving his trauma time and again ensured that the lessons of Pearl Harbor would not be lost. He taught us that history is not just about events, but about people, their struggles, their courage, and their enduring spirit. His life was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, a beacon of remembrance for a generation that faced unimaginable challenges. Thomas Bennett, the young sailor who witnessed the dawn of a new, terrifying age, became a guardian of its memory. He ensured that the courage, the sacrifice, and the sheer human will to survive, embodied by all Pearl Harbor survivors, would never be forgotten. His final message, carried forward by those who heard his story, is a powerful reminder that while time may pass, true remembrance endures, a guiding light for future generations.